Chapter 26, Catastrophe. "How was the open house?" Nikki asked. "Lovely," said Crystal. "And did anybody want to buy the house?" "Well, we have an offer," said Crystal. She didn't sound as happy as Nikki thought she would. "From who?" "A couple named Hardesty. Retired, children grown, looking to start a senior health center. Vitamins, herbal remedies, exercise equipment, a library with books about how to cope with hair loss and stiff joints and swollen ankles and that sort of thing." Crystal looked dispirited. "I don't love the idea," she said, "but they offered a good price, and they're ready to sign as soon as they sell their house in the city. I called your mother about it. She thinks we should accept." So it was over. Goal number 1 lost. No hope at all. Once again, that night, Nikki crept upstairs after Crystal had gone to sleep and spent the night in the nursery with Otis. He curled up close under her chin. His fur smelled of the woods. In the morning, Nikki got up while the sky was still dark. She took Otis out, stood with him in the cold while he did what he needed to do, and took him back upstairs. Then she climbed into the bed in her regular room to wait for the light. As soon as a gray streak showed in the gap between the curtains, Nikki got up and got dressed. She moved quietly. In the chilly kitchen, she made herself some toast and drank a glass of milk. Then she went out to see what was going to happen when Mrs. Beeson's helpers came to get the dogs. She didn't know when or where the dog pickups would start, but as it turned out, it was easy to find them. As soon as she got down the hill, she saw a school bus moving slowly down Main Street. There were no children in it. At Trillium Street, it turned right. A blue van behind it made the same turn. On the van's side, in white letters, was printed, "Church of the Fiery Vision." In the front seat, next to the driver, Nikki saw Mrs. Beeson. Other people were in the van, too. It was full. Nikki followed the bus, walking fast. The bus and the van pulled up at a small brown house. Out of the van climbed Mrs. Beeson and several men, including all 4 of Yonwood's police officers. One of the policemen knocked on the front door of the house. A man came to the door, leading a medium-sized brown and white spaniel. He patted the dog twice and then went quickly back inside and shut the door. The policeman led the dog to the bus and lifted it inside. Everyone got back in the van, and it moved on. This is how it went. Nikki followed and watched it all. Other people trailed after the bus, too. She saw Martin among them, nodding sternly as he watched the dogs being collected. How could she ever have thought she liked him? All around her, people commented on what was happening. Most of them had decided, it seemed, that Mrs. Beeson was doing the right thing. "It's hard, of course," said a stout, middle-aged woman in a green knit hat. "But doing the right thing just is hard sometimes, isn't it? I don't have a dog myself, but if I did, I'd give it up in a heartbeat." A bald man in round glasses nodded. "I know a lot of people who had trouble with this," he said, "but once they made the decision, they were proud of themselves. They felt strong, you know what I mean?" Nikki thought of how giving up hot chocolate had made her feel. Strong, yes, and proud of herself for doing a hard thing. But how could you feel that way about your dog, who was going to be thrown out into the cold? It wasn't just you giving something up. You were making the dogs give up their home and maybe their lives. The woman in the green hat nodded. "We have to trust in our Prophet and put aside our own selfish feelings," she said, "for the good of all." But it was hard for Nikki to see the good in what was going on. At each dog-owning household, the bus stopped. The police went to the door, knocked, and then waited while the people inside put the leash on their dog and brought him or her out. Some people put on a brave or saintly face like the first man. They simply patted the dog once or twice on the head, and then went back inside and closed the door and did not watch the men lead the dog away. At other houses there were scenes, especially if children lived there. Loud crying came from inside, and some children even broke away from their parents and ran out and grabbed their dog's collar, screaming, "No, no, you can't take him." and the policeman had the sad duty of uncurling the fingers from the collar, and the parents had to wrestle the child back inside. A very few families refused to open their doors at all. Mrs. Beeson wrote down their addresses. After about an hour, when a second and third bus had been added to the first to hold all the dogs, and a chorus of barking, whining, and howling came from the bus windows, Nicky began to tremble, as if she had a hard-beating heart in every part of her body. Her teeth chattered, but not just from the cold. Suddenly, she couldn't stand it anymore. She ran, heading back home to get Otis and hide him where no one would find him, just in case, somehow the dog bus came to Greenhaven. As she ran, she kept saying to herself, "It's all right, it's all right. No one knows he's there. I have plenty of time, he's safe. No one knows about him, only Amanda and Grover. So he's all right." But still, the sound of barking and shouting followed her as she ran. Crystal would probably be there, but Nicky didn't care anymore if Crystal found out about Otis. She'd have to find out soon anyway. It was time for her to know. And Crystal would help her hide him, wouldn't she? She wouldn't let him be taken away. But when she got to Greenhaven, Crystal's car wasn't there. Where could she have gone? Out to breakfast? It didn't matter. Nicky raced up the path and bounded up the stone steps. She opened the front door and dashed inside and started up the stairs, and stopped short just before reaching the second floor, because there was Amanda, standing at the top of the stairs with Otis in her arms. Nicky stared, but then relief swept through her. "Oh," she said, "you thought of it too." Amanda didn't move. "Thought of what?" she said. Otis licked her neck, and she lifted her chin to get away from his tongue. "To hide Otis," Nicky said, "so they won't find him. Even though nobody knows he's here, it would be better—" "They do know he's here," said Amanda. She still didn't move. "Oh no, they do? Then we have to hurry. How do they know? Come on, let's—" "I told Mrs. Beeson," said Amanda in a cool, flat voice. "You what?" Nicky's heart seemed to stop. "I called her up and told her. Course I did. Did you think I'd want to mess up everything? Did you think I'd go against the Prophet?" Nicky ran at Amanda and grabbed at Otis with both hands. Amanda pulled him away. "No," she cried. "She said no dogs. I have to take him." "You can't take him." Nicky reached again for Otis, who was now thrashing wildly in Amanda's grip. But Amanda darted to the side and turned her back, clutching Otis close to her chest. And when Nicky came at her again and grabbed her arm, she made a sudden ferocious twist, sending Nicky staggering across the floor, and turned back toward the stairway. Nicky got her balance and came after her. When Amanda reached the top of the stairs, Nicky was close behind. She could have pushed her. It would have been easy. Amanda would have dropped Otis, who would have scrambled away, and she would have fallen down the whole length of those hard, polished steps. She might have broken bones. She might have been killed. The urge to push her was so strong that Nicky just barely kept herself from doing it. Instead, she grabbed for Amanda's shirt tail. Amanda jerked away, and Nicky fell back and sat down hard on the top step. Before she could get up, Amanda was halfway down the stairs. Nicky followed, but Amanda was too far ahead. When Nicky reached the bottom step, Amanda was at the front door throwing it open. When Nicky got to the front door, Amanda was racing down the path toward the sidewalk. And when Nicky made it to the sidewalk, Amanda was running as fast as she could toward the corner of Cloud and Trillium Streets, where the blunt yellow nose of the school bus was just coming into view. That was when the sobs came up in Nicky's throat, and the tears flew from her eyes, and she kept running and crying, but only for half a block, because she could see the man coming down from the bus, and Amanda running up to him and holding out Otis, and the man taking Otis into the bus. At that point, Nicky stood still and screamed. Someone came out of a house and scowled at her. She screamed again. The bus moved on, turning a corner. She ran after it, crying so hard she could scarcely breathe, but it turned another corner and disappeared. Two desperate urges arose in her. One was to find Amanda and choke her to death. and the other was to find Crystal and make her drive after the school bus so she could get Otis back. Finding Otis was more important than choking Amanda. But where was Crystal? Nikki stood in the street looking wildly around, rooted to the spot, trying to think what to do. Maybe Crystal had left her a note. She ran back to Greenhaven and dashed from room to room, but no note was there. Maybe Crystal was at the restaurant. With trembling hands, she fumbled through the phone book and found the number, but when she asked if Crystal was there, the person answered said no. Finally, she ran outside again and stood in the street. Could she run downtown and try to find the school bus and somehow bash her way into it and rescue Otis? She didn't know. She couldn't think. Her breath came in hiccupy sobs, and her heart was running like an engine out of control. She wailed. She couldn't help it. A long, wavery wail. And at that moment, Crystal's car came around the corner. It drove up the street and pulled in at the curb, and instantly Nikki was beside it, pounding on the window, which Crystal rolled down. "They've taken Otis," Nikki cried. "Amanda, she came. She betrayed me and stole Otis, and he's in the bus with all the dogs. You have to help. Please, please. If we follow the bus, we could get him." Crystal gaped at her. She had a paper cup of coffee in her hand. A white bakery bag was on the seat beside her. "What in the world are you talking about?" she said. "They're taking the dogs," Nikki cried. "There's no time to explain. Please, please, can you just drive me, and I'll tell you about it while we go?" Nikki's frantic face must have persuaded Crystal. "All right," she said. "Jump in." End of chapter 26. This is getting crazy. Imagine if your city mayor was just like, "Yeah, we have to take all of your dogs and let them free. You can't have them anymore." Let me see. I don't think I missed much. I'm just scrolling back to see if I missed anything in chat. I meant to say, if you ever want to talk about it more, feel free to DM me. I'm not an expert by any means, but at least I can get some use out of my degree. Aw, that would be awesome. I don't like where this is headed. I know. I didn't remember how this book ended, so I don't even really remember the story that much, to be honest. So I don't know kind of what happens. But I vaguely remember them being like, no dogs. But we'll have to see like how this whole Prophet thing turns out, because it I don't know. I feel like it has to end with some kind of like answer as to why they're doing all these things. But who knows? Who knows? Okay. So, here we go. Chapter 27, The Chase. As fast as she could, in a few short sentences, Nikki told Crystal everything. Crystal kept interrupting, turning to Nikki with wide eyes and a dropped jaw. "You mean you've had a dog up there this whole time? There was a girl in the closet? You've been battling the forces of evil? She says dogs are doing what?" But all Nikki wanted was to find out where the buses had gone. Never mind, she said. She was still having trouble talking because of breathing so hard and shaking. "I'll tell you later. Go that way." She pointed down Cloud Street. "That's where Amanda gave," but then it turned the corner, I think onto Birch Street, and that was maybe 5 minutes ago, or 10, so I don't know where the bus is now. Crystal headed down Cloud Street. Where did this Prophet woman say that they were going to take the dogs? "Into the woods," she said. "Far away, into the woods where they belong, and then let them go so they can be wild the way that they're supposed to be." "Odd," said Crystal, driving through the neighborhood as fast as possible without actually squealing the tires. "Dogs haven't been wild for several 100,000 years. Not most dogs, anyway. They need us." "And we need them," Nikki wailed. "I need Otis." They curved up onto Spruce Street, but saw nothing. No one was in the street. A few snowflakes sifted down from the sky and landed on the car's windshield. Crystal put on the wipers. She headed down Grackle Street and turned onto Main Street. Nicky shouted, "Look!" and pointed ahead. Far down at the other end of Main Street was a patch of bright yellow. The bus! But a moment later, it turned off Main Street and was gone. "It went to the right," said Nicky. "That's High Peak Road. It goes up to the mountain. So that means they've finished collecting the dogs and they're taking them away. Can we go faster?" Crystal stepped on the gas. "If we do catch up to the buses," she said, "what happens next?" "We just follow them till they stop." Nicky was leaning forward, both hands gripping the dashboard. Then when they let the dogs out, we grab Otis." "What about everyone else's dogs?" "I don't know. I wish we could save them too." "What if the people on the bus refuse to let us have Otis?" I don't know, said Nicky. "Let's just go really fast." They turned up High Peak Road. It was a narrow, winding road, with the ranks of trees standing close on either side. The snow was falling faster now, whirling toward them, making it hard to see. Crystal slowed down. There was no sign of the buses. "I don't know," said Crystal. "This might not be a good idea." Nicky said nothing. She kept her eyes glued forward, staring through the spinning whiteness. How would Otis survive in a snowstorm? He was little. He didn't know how to get his own food. Crystal glanced over at her. "Why didn't you tell me about this dog before?" "I thought you'd take him to the pound. You said you would." "I did?" Crystal shook her head. "So you've been getting fond of him all this time, haven't you?" Nicky nodded. Tears came to her eyes again, and she couldn't speak. "I don't get it," Crystal said. "This prophet woman says the love you give a dog is subtracted from the love you give God. Have I got that right?" Nicky nodded. The sky was growing darker as afternoon turned to evening. The shadows in the woods were so thick she could no longer see between the trees. So would that apply to cats too, I wonder? Parakeets, hamsters, undeserving people? How do you decide what's okay to love according to the prophet? "I don't know," said Nicky. She didn't want to talk about this now. She just wanted Crystal to hurry up. The car was going slowly around the curves. Crystal had turned on the headlights, but they brightened the spiral snow more than the road ahead. Nicky's neck hurt from craning forward, trying to see. "Love is love, seems to me," said Crystal. "As long as what you love isn't armed robbery, or bombing airplanes, or kidnapping little children." "Can we go faster?" Nicky asked. "Not without sliding off the road," Crystal shook her head. "We're going to have to give this up, I think. It's dangerous." She slowed down even more to go around a bend in the road, and then suddenly she stamped on the brakes and the car slid sideways. Careening toward them out of the blinding whiteness was something big and yellow. "The bus!" screamed Nicky. "It's coming down!" Crystal pulled over and stopped. Behind the first bus was another one, and another, each one furred with white on top. They passed by and trundled on downhill. "But are the dogs still in there?" Nicky said. "Or did they let them out?" Crystal pulled the car back out onto the road. "My guess is that those bus drivers didn't want to drive in this weather any more than I do. I bet they just jumped the dogs and turned around." "Then let's keep going," Nicky cried, bouncing frantically in her seat. "We can find them." Crystal drove on, but she was frowning at the road and going slower than ever. After about 10 minutes, they came to a place where the trees thinned out, and on the right was an open field, lightly dusted with snow. Nicky could see a dark mush of tire tracks here. "Stop!" she cried. "I think this is where the buses turned around. Can we get out and see?" "We're turning around too," said Crystal, but she stopped the car. Nicky flung the door open and jumped out. She ran toward the tire tracks and scanned the field. At the far edge, where the forest resumed, she saw something moving. A dog? No, 2 dogs? Or 3? Leaping across the snow-dusted ground, heading for the trees. "Otis!" Nicky shouted, though the dogs she saw were too big to be Otis. "Otis! Otis, come!" Come back." But the dogs disappeared into the woods. If they heard her at all, they paid no attention. It was just an adventure to them, a thrilling freedom, at least at first. They didn't understand yet that there were no food bowls in the woods, no warm fires, no people. Crystal came up and stood beside her. "I want to go after them," Nikki said. "Will you wait for me? I'll just run across there and call Otis again from where he can hear me." "We've got a snowstorm starting up," Crystal said, "and it's almost dark. I can't let you go plunging around in the woods. I'm afraid we're too late." "No," cried Nikki. "It's just over there," she said, pointing across the wide field to where the trees made a dark line in the distance. "Otis!" she screamed again. But nothing moved out in the field, and the snow whirled faster, filling the air until the trees had vanished behind a blur of white. "We have to go," said Crystal. Her voice was sad and kind. All the way back down the mountain, Nikki said hardly a word. She sat staring through the passenger side window at the tree trunks ghostly in the snow, knowing it was too dark to see anything moving among them, but unable to make her eyes look anywhere else. She felt as if 100 stones had collected inside her. Crystal pulled up outside Greenhaven. "I'm sorry about this, sweetie," she said. "I just had no idea any of this was going on. How could I not have known it?" "You were busy," Nikki said, "with other things." She was so tired all of a sudden. She barely had the strength to open the car door. But even after they got inside, Crystal kept asking questions, and Nikki kept having to explain things. And then they had to have something to eat, which Nikki wasn't hungry for at all. And Crystal had to talk about how strange it was that no word had come from the president about whether there was going to be war. It seemed like forever before Nikki could get into bed and close her eyes. And of course by then, she wasn't sleepy anymore. She lay there thinking about Otis out in the snowstorm, cold and hungry and alone. She thought about the white bear, which might eat small dogs. She thought about Mrs. Beeson, who was trying to do good and was causing so much pain, and about Althea Tower, the prophet, whose vision had started everything. And she thought about what she herself had done, and at that, she buried her face in the pillow and tried not to think at all. "I want my mother," she whispered, "and my father. I want to go home." End of chapter 27. Wow. This went from crazy to super sad. Let me see. I will catch this on YouTube later this week. Have to mute for now. Have a good stream, Colie Q. Thank you so much for popping in. I know you aren't totally caught up yet, so thank you for even coming. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If she thinks domestic dogs are going to be able to survive, oh, I know. It's I'm getting chills just thinking about it, and it's not even real. Coco, hello. Welcome in. Happy Tuesday. The bagel is safe, and that is one of the commands that I had switched over, so good to know that it still works. It's good to know that that still works, because I did transfer that over. I see we were talking about archiving. I can join that convo now. Let's go, Coco. We can always talk about it in the library channel, too, if people have, things they want to say about it. I've missed a whole bunch, but does this series have any magical elements to it? I don't think so. I'm trying to remember from the first, because the first book was just a whole bunch of people underground. Second book, they were just living their lives, basically. I don't think so. I don't think there's been any kind of magical elements to it. For some reason, I keep expecting some magical realism elements to happen. I don't know why. The only thing that we have read that we still don't know what it technically is yet is in this book. One of the townspeople nobody really likes him, and his house, he has something like he does like experiments in his house that nobody really knows about, but he told one of the children, I think he told Nikki actually, and she saw that he like did something and there was this like bright light, and Grover said that it looked like he cracked open the sky, but we don't know like if that's science, like we don't know what he's doing. So that's the only thing that could be, just because we don't know what it is yet. There has been discussion of God. Yes, that's true. So it could be supernatural, miraculous at any time. Yeah, because I mean, this book is about a prophet. Supposedly. Supposedly. As far as we know, right? They're calling her a prophet because they think that she is sending messages from God. And that's the whole thing about like why they're trying to get rid of these dogs, because they heard her, she like mumbles things, and so they thought they heard her say like no dogs. That's as far as we know. That's as far as we know. I'm working in archiving now. Oh, are you actually, Coco? Okay. I don't know if I knew that. This book is completely different from the first one, right? Yes, it is. So the first and second book had similar characters. This one does not. This one does not so far have any similar characters from the first two books. Yes. Yes, this is book 3. This is book 3. And there is a fourth book that we are also going to read. And then it stops there. They were vibing. Yeah, in the second book, they were kind of just living their lives. Things were happening. Maybe because it's dystopian YA is why I'm thinking that. Maybe this is technically juvenile, I believe. I believe this is a juvenile series. So it's like very young. It's very young. I keep thinking you're talking about my book because I have similar names and it's freaking me out. Oh yeah, I remember you telling me about that at the beginning of the book. Mm-hmm. That's so funny. It's also funny that obviously the main like little girl, her name is Nikki, and Nikki is probably the only nickname I hate being called. I refuse to be called Nikki, like ever. I think YA has melded with late teens as a genre now. I feel, yeah, middle grade is what we call it. Okay. Yeah, we just call it, we have juvenile and then we have like teen. Like this is below teen. This is not even teen. this is very young, this series. So that's why I figured it would be kind of a good thing to read on stream, because nobody can get mad about like juvenile books, right? You know. But eventually I want to read more like other books too, because I prefer to read teen or like young adult. That's usually what I read, is like the young adult section. So teen is sketch. Yeah, how do you mean? How do you mean? It's sketch. That's like the only thing I do read. I don't know if I find it sketchy. Had to put chapstick on. If something is tagged as teen, it's a 50-50% chance. It's not really appropriate for a teenager because teen is very broad. I mean, I guess. 13 to 19, very different ages. That's true. That's true. I mean, I guess it's like, it's just your level of reading, right? Like, when I was reading, I was above my level, so I never actually read the level where I was at. I always read, like, above my level. So I think it just, like, kind of depends on your level of reading, not what age you are. Because you can be more mature or less mature, you know, than what you are actually aged. And that's what librarians are for, to help you figure out what your appropriate age level reading is. Not me, though. I don't do that.
What's mine?
Your reading level is probably what I'm reading right now.
What is what?
Juvenile. Is that mean? You don't read. So like I feel like that means you shouldn't just jump into like Moby Dick right now.
I was like Moby Dick right now on stream.
Okay, go
Word
ahead.
for word.
All right, go ahead. I'm just speaking from experience. Yeah. That's why I don't like YA now, because they like to stick inappropriate stuff in a book that could technically go into the hands of a 13-year-old because of the word teen. I guess so. I don't know. I feel like that's a very, like, hard thing to kind of define. Because in our library, just as an example, once you get to age 13, you're considered a young adult. That's why I said I hate the word teen as a genre. That's fair, I guess. Yeah. I can see that. There and really, I mean, it's hard too because some just from experience, some libraries will categorize one book like just the other day, I was looking at a movie and I'm like, this is a kid's movie. Like I've seen this movie. It was like a Disney movie or something. And I'm like, but it was marked as like an adult movie. Not like adult like in that way, but just as like a regular general movie. And I'm like, why is it marked this way? Like shouldn't this be in the kids section? And it was just we had two copies, one in the kids section, one in the regular section. But like certain, you could find one book at one library that says it's young adult, and in a different library it's considered like a regular fiction novel or whatever. So it's really kind of hard to kind of categorize those things. I always read things above, you did too, above your grade level, yeah. That's why I wish books had rating tags like video games. I'd much rather know if anything is inappropriate in it. Yeah, and I mean, even like there's plenty of fiction adult books that don't have anything inappropriate in it. So I mean, that's tough. That's really tough. I feel like you more have to look at the summary of the book rather than the genre of the book. I think the summary will tell you a whole lot more than the genre. You are absolutely able to make that decision. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And also with the help of librarians. 100%. 100%. ESRB. What's an ESRB? I don't know what that is. Oh, like if there's sexual content, just tell me. Gotcha. Yeah, I guess that would make things really kind of difficult to look up. Also, ad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for ads. YA books nowadays love sneaking it in, and I'm not reading that. See, I like when YA books have that stuff. Okay, I won't discuss things when they're ads. I know, I know. I just get in the moment. I just get in the moment. Sorry about ads. They'll come back in a minute. Less than a minute. I'll take another hydration break while we're waiting. We've only read 2 out of the 4 chapters. We're going really slow with this. It's okay though. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Okay. So because I read Coco's comment about YA books nowadays, like having a lot of like, not a lot, but like they'll sneak in some like sexual stuff. But I kind of like that because I think the YA authors do it better than the adult authors do. I think I'm going to stop talking about this. It's just very hard to like, because everyone has their own opinion, their own preference, right? So really, if you read the book summary and you like it, you're going to read the book. If you read the summary, you don't like it, you don't read the book. But then if you read it, like I've read a book where it got to a part that made me extremely uncomfortable. I had no idea that that was going to be in that book, but the only reason it made me uncomfortable was because of my past experiences, not because the book was out of my range of reading. You know what I mean? So it's like there are a lot of opinions, but there are also professional standards from librarians, and that's the point of view I'm speaking from. Exactly. Yeah, it's just that's how it gets categorized because that's that level of what it is, kind of deal. And it's very hard to like. That's a lot of the time why like book review sites are really really good because then you can look up a review that someone has actually read the book and can tell you, hey, this stuff is in it. If you don't like this, that kind of thing. I hate it because it conflicts with my morals, is what I'm saying. Oh, yeah, 100%. I totally get where you're coming from. I totally get where you're coming from. I think it's just a hard thing. You kind of just have to be extra careful when you're picking out books, probably. Because that's not something, that's just your own preference. That's your own, right? Am I getting that right? I don't think a 13-year-old should be reading very explicit stuff, but that's why I recommend rating tags. And some books do. Some books do, but I think that's more like children's books. They'll have rating tags of like what level it is instead of just a genre tag because I can't trust YA anymore. I mean, a lot of the times the book summary will kind of lead you in whatever direction the book is going to have. Like they have no indication and they sneak it. I don't think I've ever read a book where it wasn't expected, even just like in the littlest bit. Like I said earlier, the only like kinds of things if like something very inappropriate where like I read the book and something was in it that like I said, it made me very, very uncomfortable. I did not, I almost like did not finish the book because it made me that uncomfortable. And I had no idea that that was going to be in there. And people who had read the book before did not tell me that that was going to be in there. But I didn't really look up reviews or anything ahead of time because I don't typically do that. But it does suck when you're reading a book and things make you uncomfortable. But I think if something did make you extremely uncomfortable, if you're the one reading it, I get Coco that you're like, oh, you don't want a younger person reading something that a more older person could also read. But at the same time, if you're a 13-year-old, are you really going to choose the book that has like a half naked guy on front? I don't think so. I don't think so. No, you would not. I wasn't. When I was 13-year-old, I was still picking out books that had like rainbows and like tweeny bopper stuff on it. I don't know. That's just everybody's different though. Everybody's different. But I completely get where you're both coming from cuz it's just like it's one of those things, right? It's just one of those things you can't put a definitive thing on it. There are plenty of resources where you can find that information. Yes. Authors do sneak it in sometimes. Yes. I agree. Like they have no indication. Exactly. That's literally what selectors are for. And that's also why sometimes I like those like book review websites, especially if you can have like with Goodreads, right? You can have friends on there and you can see if your friend has read that book and be like, hey, is this book okay for me? Kind of thing, right? So like, and that's also why I really like having my library channel in my Discord and I'll put, the books that I'm reading in there. That way, or anyone, like if anyone reads a book, they can stick it in there and put their review in it. I'm like, that's what it's for. So that way, if, say, you saw a book that I read and you were interested in it, you could ask me about it. Or if someone posted a book and I was interested in it, I could be like, hey, is this something I might like? You know, that kind of thing. So I really like love that people can kind of use that library channel in my Discord for that too. Um, they do a ton of research for what they're purchasing for their system. Oh, is that how it works? I actually never knew that. I actually never knew that. But I know of like different people who do that. Apparently I'm in the minority. No, you're not in the minority. Everyone just has their own preferences. I think that's what it all comes down to, honestly. You know, I prefer to read whatever kind of book I prefer to read. You prefer to read what kind of book you prefer to read. And again, even just in general, people have their own thoughts, opinions, morals. It's all preference. It's all preference. I still pick out books with rainbows. They pretty. Exactly, Terror. Exactly. I do too. Like when I pick out a new book, I usually do it based on the cover, which is like I'll see a cover. If I like the cover, I'll read the summary. If I still like it, I'll put it in my to read. If the cover's really cool but the summary's not great, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to put it in my list. Or maybe it's a bad cover and the book's actually really good and I'll just never know because I never took that chance because the cover sucked. I don't know. It's so hard to pick out books these days, isn't it? It's so hard. But yeah. Yeah. That's a whole conversation, isn't it? That's a whole conversation. But I love talking about it. We love books here. We love books. We love opinions. We love preferences. Covers are important. I think so. I think so. I always think to myself when I'm putting a cover on a book, I'm like, who decided that this was the cover? Who decided that this was the font that they wanted to use? Who decided these were the colors they were going to use? Does anybody else think about that? Just me? I don't know. Be like the musical yesterday, Take a Chance on Me, but being the book? Yes, Terror, yes, exactly. The book just wants to be loved. The book just wants to be read. Here we go. Let's keep reading. All right, let's go. Chapter 28. One more trip to the woods. In the morning, a white cloak of snow lay across the ground. Rooftops and tree branches wore caps of white, and from the bedroom window, Nikki saw that the mountainside had turned from gray to silver. The sun shone down on this white world and made it glitter. It was beautiful. If she hadn't been so sad, Nikki would have rushed outside to make snow angels and snow caves. But she didn't have the heart for it this morning. Besides, Crystal had plenty of work for her. Nikki begged Crystal to drive her up to High Peak Road again so she could look for Otis. But Crystal said no. This was a busy day. They'd never find the dog. The woods were vast, and besides, everything was buried in snow. And anyhow, they'd be leaving soon, and what would Nikki do with a dog? Nikki's orders were to clean out the nursery, put the lamps and furniture back where they came from, pack up the toys and games and other things, throw anything old and useless. All morning she worked on this. It was awful not having Otis there. When she picked up his food bowl and his water bowl, a lump of sorrow rose in her throat. She put the bowls in a big plastic bag so she wouldn't have to look at them. She was going to keep the picture of the Siamese twins. Crystal told her she could have it, either to keep or to sell. She'd called an antique expert and asked about it, and he offered to pay $350 for it, sight unseen. But Nikki wanted to keep it, along with the cross-written letter. After all, these were among the few souvenirs she'd have from this whole trip. She put them carefully at the bottom of her suitcase. She'd asked Crystal if she could keep her great-grandfather's notebook, too. She felt as if he'd kept her company, a little, while she was here in his house. Now she picked up the notebook and riffled the pages, thinking again about the mystery they contained. The professor had encountered a pool of sadness in the west bedroom, and he had seen something there too, or thought he had. She sat down on the window seat and flipped through until she had found that entry. January 4th. Extraordinary experience last night. Went into the back bedroom to look for the scissors. Thought I saw someone in there over by the bed. Dark-haired figure, transparent, swirl of skirt. Dreadful feeling of sorrow hit me like a wave. Had to grab the doorknob, almost fell. Figure faded, vanished. Maybe something wrong with my eyes? Or heart? Reading this again, she remembered something. The long-ago death of a child, and the mother's grief. And the dates. January 4th for the death. January 4th for the echo her great-grandfather had felt. If that's what he'd really felt, an echo. Could it be? When the child died, the mother would have felt such a knife-like sorrow that it might have left a scar, somehow beside the bed in the west bedroom, a scar so deep it could last through 100 years and more? And the old professor, near death himself, might have felt it, might have even caught the merest glimpse of the grief-stricken mother as she had stood there on that awful day. Or, thought Nicky, closing the notebook and staring outside at the light and the snow, maybe the professor had read about this tragedy somewhere and forgotten that he knew it. Maybe he just imagined what he saw and what he felt. Or maybe he'd made it all up to go with the rest of the theories of parallel worlds that he was interested in, those leaks between the past and present and future. Had he really caught a glimpse of the past? Did the prophet catch glimpses of the future? There was no way to know. She put the notebook in her suitcase with the photograph of the twins and the crosshatched letter, and she went back to work on the nursery. When she was finished, the room looked just the way it had when she'd first seen it. Empty, except for the rolled-up rug and the rocking chair and the iron bed with a slanted rectangle of sunlight on the wooden floor. What would this room be when the new owners moved in? She hated to think of it filled with dumbbells and stationary bicycles. It wasn't meant to be that kind of room. She just knew it. It wasn't meant to be someone's office either, full of humming computers and gizmos with little flashing lights. It was meant for children. After that, she went down to Grover's house to say goodbye. A snowplow had cleared the streets, pushing the snow in lumpy banks to either side. Already the snow was starting to melt. Trickles of water ran down into the street. Nicky heard bits of conversation as she passed people. Mostly it was about the silence from the White House. No declaration of war, no declaration of peace either. Just nothing. The nothingness seemed to upset everyone. They argued about what it meant, good news or bad news. Nicky couldn't worry about it. Her mind was full of so much else that the question of war seemed far away. She headed down Trillium Street. No one was sitting on the porch when she got to Grover's house. It was much too cold. She knocked on the door, and Grover's grandmother opened it. "Hi," said Nicky. "Is Grover here?" "Down in his snake shack," said Granny Carey. "They came and took that thing off him," she added. "Good," said Nicky. "That woman has her notions," Granny Carey said. Nicky figured she meant Mrs. Beeson. "She wants the town to be perfect," she said. "In this life," said Granny Carey, "you don't get to have things perfect. Life is messy, no way around it." She beckoned Nicky into the house, and Nicky went down the hall and out the back door and across the slippery yard to the shed. Inside, Grover was stacking the empty glass cases. "Hi," said Nicky. For once, he didn't make a Hi, he said. For once, he didn't make a comic production out of it. "I came to say goodbye," Nicky said. "We're leaving the day after tomorrow." "Wish I was," said Grover. He put the cases on a lower shelf and started to spread out some magazines in the empty space. "Did your dog get taken?" Nicky nodded. She still couldn't talk about it without crying, so she changed the subject. "Did you find out yet if you won any of those contests?" "Not yet." "I hope you did." "I probably didn't. I'll probably be stuck here forever." You don't know. Anything could happen. Grover made a round-eyed, open-mouthed, fake excited face. Right, he said. All kinds of possibilities. I could get a great job waiting tables at the cafe. Or I could be a soldier. Or, oh boy, the world could blow up. I don't think any of those will happen, Nikki said. Actually, it seemed to her that any of them might, but she could see that Grover was discouraged, and she wanted to cheer him up. I think you're going to get to go on your trip. Ha, said Grover. You're just saying that to cheer me up. No, I'm not, said Nikki, because an idea had hit her. A really good idea. And all at once she was telling the truth. I can see into the future, she said, and I know it's going to happen. Well, fine, said Grover, and you're going to be president of the world. Nikki just smiled. You'll see, she said. It's been nice knowing you. And she walked back to Greenhaven feeling, for the first time in 2 days, a little bit good. The next day, the sun shone brightly again. Nikki stood on the sidewalk in front of Greenhaven and watched as a crew of burly men carried one piece after another of heavy, dark, carved wood furniture down the steps and down the path, grunting and swearing, and heaved the beds and sofas and sideboards into the truck bound for the auction house. She saw the lamp go, the one with the parchment shade. The rocking chair went, too, piled into the back of the truck like a prisoner being carted off to jail. When that truck was full, another one arrived. This time, the burly men went down into the basement, where decades' worth of beds and chairs and dining tables were stacked on top of one another. It took hours just to empty out the basement. When the trucks were finally gone, Nikki and Crystal wandered through the house. Their footsteps thudded hollowly on the bare floors, and their voices, when they called to each other from room to room, shivered with echoes. Strangely enough, though, the house didn't seem sad. Nikki had the feeling it was glad to be emptied out and unburdened. It was taking a deep breath of fresh, cool air, looking out through its clean windows, ready for whatever was coming next. Even Crystal seemed to sense this. Really, she said, it's a fine old place. Without all that ghastly Victorian furniture, it's much improved. You could put, for instance, a white couch right there by the front parlor windows, and a glass-topped coffee table. She held out her arm and tilted her head to one side, imagining it, and then wandered into the dining room. And then, of course, a total kitchen remodel. A slate floor would tone in well, and maybe cabinets in birch or white pine to lighten the look. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, and her arm dropped to her side. But what am I thinking? It's going to be senior haven, she sighed. Nikki sighed too. It was sad the way the things had turned out. Losing Otis was the worst, but she hadn't achieved a single one of the goals she'd set for herself either. She wasn't going to live here with her parents after all. She hadn't fallen in love, and she hadn't done a single thing to make the world a better place. She'd be going away from here next morning, probably forever, so she decided to go up into the woods and look for Otis one more time, and say goodbye to Yonwood. With the last of her money, she bought herself a snack at the cafe, a bag of corn chips, 2 peanut butter cookies, and a bottle of grape juice. She put these in her backpack, along with a small plastic bag full of dog crunchies, and Otis's food and water bowls, just in case. She set off up the trail and was soon in the woods, where the sun-striped blue tree trunk shadows crossed the snow. The sun was warm on her face. She walked with stubborn energy, and every 5 minutes or so she stopped and called for Otis. But she heard no distant barking, no sound at all, except for the patter of melting snow dripping from the branches. She came to the log where she sat with Grover 3 days before. Here she looked out over the view of the town. The sky was deep, deep blue, an upside-down ocean of air. Was God up there somewhere, looking down on the whole world at once, deciding who was good and who wasn't, figuring out what was normal, planning to sweep everything clean? She wanted to know. She wanted to be sure. But this was one area where her overactive imagination didn't seem to work. She simply could not figure out how a being in the sky, no matter how vast he was, could see everywhere. She didn't see why God would say one thing to the Prophet of Yonwood and another thing to another prophet halfway across the world. Because clearly, not all of these people who said that God spoke to them heard the same thing. All the fighting nations said God was on their side. How could God be on everyone's side? Nikki could only think that either there were lots of different gods all saying different things to different people, or that God didn't really speak to people at all, or that people thought they were hearing God speak when they were really hearing something else. A bird flew across the sky, level with her line of sight. It lit on the top branch of a pine tree, pointed its beak upward, and sang out a long, warbling burble of notes. Did God speak to birds? Or were birds speaking to God? She called Otis one more time, shouting his name out into the vast air. No answer. Just the bird, singing its heart out. Suddenly, she felt finished here. She was ready to go, ready to get out of this place that made her heart hurt. She took off her backpack and got out Otis's bowls. From her water bottle, she filled his water dish. She poured the crunchies into his food bowl. Both of these she set at the side of the trail, next to the end of the fallen log. Maybe he would find them, or maybe one of the other dogs would and remember its home and go on down the trail back to its family. The bag with her snack in it was still in her backpack. She realized she wasn't hungry. The very thought of food made her stomach clench. So she set the bag on the log. She liked the look of that. A present for a dog and a present for a person. An offering to whoever might need it. Why not make it even nicer? She walked a little way off the trail, poking around in the leaf litter, looking up into the branches. Some pine cones lay beneath a tree, and she picked up the best one, a perfect, fat, sturdy shape, all its little wooden tabs lined up in a spiral. She went farther, through, in the deep shade of the pines. The snow still covered the ground, and her shoes sank into it and got wet. She found a bush with red berries, and broke off a branch of it. She found a smooth, plum-sized stone, powdered with veins of white. She brought these things back to the log, and arranged them around the bag of snacks. The branch was like an arm around the bag. The berries were jewels. The stone was for her heart, which was heavy and hard. And the pine cone was just a pine cone, something nature had made that looked nearly perfect. She stepped back and gazed at what she'd done. Very nice, but it needed a finishing touch. What did she have that she could add to it? She put her hands in her pockets and felt around. In her left pocket was a piece of paper. She pulled it out. It was a picture of the dust mite, a little bent. She stuck it between the pine cone and the stone so that it stood up. It added a note of strangeness that was exactly right. It seemed to say, "Remember, I'm here too, along with other things you can't see. The world is full of endless strange surprises." She started back down the trail. If no dogs find the food, she thought, maybe squirrels will. Or that white bear. Or if no one finds it, then it can all be for God. Only not for the prophet's God, her mean, picky God who dislikes so many things. It's for my God, the God of dogs and snakes and dust mites and albino bears and Siamese twins, the God of stars and starships and other dimensions, the God who loves everyone, who makes everything marvelous. End of chapter 28.